You're not stuck to schedules. You can go when you want to, and so forth. So this is important, I think, also for the development, in a strange way, of the Russian political system as well.
On the Russian political system, it was again voiced during the summit that the Russians would like to see Jackson-Vanik, the amendment that was put in to put pressure on the Soviet Union to free Soviet Jews, see it abolished. We come back here, we hear not a lot of noise in favor of abolishing the Jackson-Vanik amendment. What's the story with Jackson-Vanik? Are we ever going to see it disappear, or is it kind of like air, it's always going to be with us?
It's a complicated story, obviously, and it goes beyond U.S.-Russian relations. There's an element here that we don't talk about when we talk to our Russian colleagues about this. This gets into how trade policy is decided in the United States. Membership in the World Trade Organization. There is a misconception in many parts of the United States and in Russia as well that Russia can not get into the WTO unless we lift Jackson-Vanik. Not true. There have been other cases where we have had the Jackson-Vanik amendment and a country has been in the WTO. The issue here is really how we can operate with Russia in the WTO with Jackson-Vanik still on the books. Now, the reason Congress doesn't lift Jackson-Vanik is they want to have some control over U.S. trade policy. They think that keeping Jackson-Vanik on the books gives them some leverage over our negotiators in their negotiations with the Russians, so they can push them to be a little tougher than they might be otherwise. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect is, as I said, if Russia gets into the WTO and Jackson-Vanik is on the books, Jackson-Vanik works against our businessmen. We can't benefit from the opening of the markets that we negotiated with Russia during the WTO negotiation. So it becomes, for an administration, relatively easier to get Jackson-Vanik lifted when the clear detriment to our interest is evident even to the Congress. Now, for President Obama to use what political capital he would have to lift Jackson-Vanik, given everything else that he has on the agenda with the Congress, domestic issues, health care, for example, I think it's unlikely that he's going to do that.
So, not going to put that chip on the table.
Not right now, and certainly not before there's clear evidence that this relationship is continuing to improve. So I think we have some time to wait. I think it's important that we've heard signals that the Russians are going to re-engage on WTO, and if we can get the WTO negotiations moving forward, then we can begin to increase pressure for the repeal of Jackson-Vanik at about the same time Russia is entering the WTO.
Maybe we could make a deal. The Russians find out who killed Pavel Chlebnikov, the Fortune reporter, and we decide to repeal Jackson-Vanik. That wouldn't be a bad deal, would it?
And how Noski Busser do play in this game.
Bush legs.
Well, the chicken's important.
But you know what's interesting about that? That's one of those cases where something that started out as goodwill has become part of a conspiracy theory. The first President Bush sends over drumsticks to Russia as food aid. Some people start selling the Bush legs on the black market. Then the importers of chicken from Arkansas, the home state of Bill Clinton, start importing it. There's a whole battle over when chicken can be imported. The Russian ruble crashes so that it's then more cheaper to have Russian-produced chickens, and they go back and forth on these chicken legs. And everyone says, conspiracy. Nobody in America is clever enough to think of the Bush legs conspiracy.
And certainly not a multi-year conspiracy like the Goodyear conspiracy. We're incapable of doing a conspiracy for 24 hours, let alone over several years.
Maybe we should send Sarah Palin there to be in charge of, Bush legs conspiracy down talk. I mean, maybe she could handle that.
Well, she does have this issue of what she's going to do now that she's stepping down as governor of Alaska.
Yeah. Well, maybe if Tymoshenko becomes the leader of Ukraine, that would be a real good pairing to have an American ambassador and have her there. That's, I think, a bridge too far even for my surrealistic sense of humor.
Yes. We need Catherine the Great again in Russia. It would be easier for her to deal with Timoshenko.
You remember Catherine the Great read Radishchev's journey from St. Petersburg to Moscow about the awful condition of serfs, sent him to exile in Siberia, and then instituted the Office of Censorship. This week we've had censorship come back in two very different forms. One, South Park. South Park gets censored for saying a joke about a whale and Putin. And two, a woman who works for Memorial in Chechnya gets the ultimate censorship by a piece of metal, gets a bullet in the back of her head. So those things are still with us. And I find that very spooky, what happened to this woman in Grozny. And whatever you say about bad things happening to the press here, you have to be very courageous to be a journalist in Russia.
I think that South Park is a case of overzealous bureaucrats or subordinates who just wanted to please their supreme boss, Vladimir Putin. I don't think that there was a case of telephone call, please do with it, please get rid of this episode. No, I think that this is self-censorship. Because I still remember the first summit, Reagan-Gorbachev in 1985, when Peter Jennings, ABC anchorman, said that all Soviet reporters covering this summit are members of the party. But they are not told how to cover the summit. They know it. So I think this is long-standing tradition in Russia. But when it comes to this courageous lady from Memorial, I have to say that this thing is much, much more serious.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, President Medvedev has said as much. But what they need to do now is to demonstrate that they can investigate a murder like this, find those that are behind it, and then deal with them in a way that is considered just under Russian law. There have been a number of these. Who is behind it, we don't know. But I think there's a sense that if the Russian government wanted to find these people, that they could. And they need to demonstrate that in a good faith investigation, that they can do something like that. I think that's important for developments inside Russia. Clearly it's important for their image abroad.
Yeah, Medvedev talks about eliminating legal nihilism. And so far we haven't had a trial that's come to a successful conclusion. Or one of recent vintage, anyhow. And Pavel Chlebnikov, an American reporter working for Fortune, it's 5 years. And the killers are still on the loose.
Yeah, look, there are a couple of things here. First, I don't think we should exaggerate the simplicity of getting this done. Sometimes murder investigations can take a long time, even in the United States, if they're done properly. And obviously that there are problems in Russia. That said, what you need is evidence of a concerted effort to move an investigation forward and to look not only for those people who may have physically committed the act, but what's more important